Today's presentation is being brought to you by O-Blend. O-Blend is a patented device that precisely blends cannabis oils and terpenes for predictable and consistent results. Today's talk is about the therapeutic yet enigmatic nature of cannabis terpenes. When we look at the term enigmatic, we see that it's defined as difficult to interpret or understand, or sometimes mysterious. In today's presentation, our objectives are to identify the terpene content of cannabis. We're going to discuss the nature of terpenes in different cannabis strains. We're going to discuss the therapeutic nature of terpenes. And we'll finish with, so what does this really mean? So terpenes are responsible for the signature odor of different cannabis strains. But they really do so much more. If we take a look at Leafly and look at a definition of terpenes, what we find is that these are the aromatic oils that color the different cannabis varieties' distinctive flavors, like citrus, mint, or pine. Terpenes play a key role in differentiating the effects of various cannabis strains. Some terpenes may promote relaxation, stress relief, while others potentially promote focus and acuity. When we start to take a look at this, we're going to depend a lot on the work of a researcher by the name of Dr. Ethan Russo. And Dr. Russo's paper, Taming THC, starts to frame the context of the discussion. When we look at the difference between terpenes and cannabinoids, what we find is they start with their own unique parent, this geranyl pyrophosphate. Then, depending on the enzymatic exposure of that molecule, this will grow into the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, or cannabinoic acid, CBD, CBC, or even the CBVs and CBCs. But we also see when that molecule is exposed to limonene synthase, we start to see the formation of individual terpenes and terpenoids. Now, cannabis until now has been referred to by strain names that are broken into classifications that are either considered sativa or indica. Sativa and indica tend to describe not just how the plant grows, but what the effects are you should expect from those plants. In an article by Dr. Russo, he makes the sense that using these labels can be nonsense, that the clinical effects of cannabis chemovores have nothing to do with whether the plant is tall or sparse, but rather it has to do with what the chemical nature of the plant includes. And when we start to look at the chemical nature, if we take a look at just the cannabinoids, what we see is that when you break these into indica, sativa, and hybrid strains, both the THC and the CBD contents are largely similar when we look at them statistically. This has led Leafly to create a whole new method of classifying strains online, starting to look at what the terpene content is. Now, we're going to do a little deeper dive into the terpene analysis, and what you're looking at here is a sheet of values that come from about 100 different strains of cannabis, 20 different terpenes within those strains. When we look at these strains, you're going to recognize many of the names. The dreams, the pineapples, the catatonic, the diesels, the cushes, the harlequin ACDCs, and you'll see that we have a large representation of different strains in this list. We also do an analysis of about the top 20 terpenes in this list. When we look at this list of terpenes, you take a look at a lot that you probably already recognize. I want you to take a minute and look at this list and think to yourself, are there terpenes here that I think I know what the response is going to be when I consume them? When we take a look at the number of terpenes in each of the strains, what we see is that on one end of the continuum, the mindful kush has about 11 of the terpenes, But the sour tangy has 19, has 8 more terpenes in its analysis. Now, when we take a look at the sour tangy breakdown, and again, this is from Leafly, what we're seeing is that this is a myrcene dominant strain. But when we take a look up at the reviews, this strain is largely energizing. So when I ask you to take a look at the 2 terpenes that you think are predictable in their response, myrcene is typically associated with what we call a couch lock effect or a sedative effect. But in this case, we're seeing where myrcene has an energizing impact. When we take a look at these terpenes and at a weight level, what we see is that the terpenes come in at an average of about 5.6 milligrams per gram dry weight product. And that first standard deviation of error brings it up to about 8.5 milligrams. What you see is a largely clustered group of products with only a couple outliers. Now, when we start to take a look at the size of the terpene load in each of the strains, one of the first things you'll notice is the greatest terpene measured in this group was this myrcene measurement out of the wedding cake. And when we look for the smallest measurement, we find that in the eucalyptal column, and that comes in at the smallest measurement on the board at about 1/1000th. Now, it's important to note, we have 1/1000th in this measurement. We had 19 milligrams. That's 20,000 units different. When we look within the strain, we see the alpha terpenine having a 0.73 milligrams per gram dry weight compared to the 19.5 for the myrcene. That's about 270 times smaller than the myrcene measurement. When we take a visual look at the actual size of the terpenes, and again, this is milligrams per gram weight, and we look at it graphically, what we see is the average measurement in that table is about 1.12 milligrams per gram dry weight, with a standard deviation which brings the first standard deviation of error up to almost 3 milligrams per gram dry weight. Now, visually, when you look at this, you start to see a lot more outliers in this when we're looking at the individual terpenes as they relate to each other. And when we take a look at all those red dots, these are going to start to tell us something. So in that table, there are 1,260 measurements. So we were able to detect terpenes at a rate greater than 1/1000th of a milligram per gram dry weight. So I took those 1,260 measurements and I conditionally formatted them to show the top 10%. So what you see in green here are the top 126 terpene weights. If we look at what those terpenes are, we see myrcene is the dominant one there. We see beta-caryophyllene, limonene, and alpha-pinene also contributing to this. We also see ocimene and terpenylene in that list, but we're going to keep our discussion now to about the top 5 terpenes in the list. So let's go explore the therapeutic value or the medicinal properties that come with cannabis, and in this case we're looking at hops terpenes as well. This list in this paper is roughly similar to the same terpenes that we have in our analysis. And when we start to take a look at them, myrcene is the most common and plentiful terpene in cannabis. Now, terpene is typically thought to be a relaxing or a sedative terpene. But when we look at the literature, what we found is that there's only weak support for this to date. And what we found that in mice that had barbiturate-induced sleeping time, that the presence of myrcene actually increased that, but it had to be at a fairly high rate. Now, consequently, if you go into a dispensary in the state of Florida that's owned by Grow Healthy, what you'll see are menu boards on the wall showing you the products they have for sale. Those menu boards come from a company out in Albuquerque, New Mexico called Bud Board. And Bud Board has another company that's called Terpenated Blends. And what they've been doing is they've been collecting the terpene samples from many of the blends that they have coming into the dispensaries that they support. They support about 28 different dispensaries in 2 different states. So they have about 500,000 data points that look at both the terpenes and what the consumer rated effects were for the particular blend. So this is a nice crowdsourced set of data to take a look at. What our friends at Terpenated Blends were able to show is that myrcene in blends where it was in a very low concentration tended to be a stimulant, whereas when it moved into high concentrations, like we see in the literature, it starts to become sedative. So what we see here is that a single terpene can have a different effect based on its concentration within the product you're purchasing. It's a strong anti-inflammatory and has been shown to slow down osteoarthritis in many models. So in summary, myrcene does have an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory effect that can protect the brain, the heart, and skin tissues from inflammation and oxidative damage. It also shows anti-nociceptive or anti-pain generation properties. However, there's only weak support for its sedative effect. So this is where we start to explore what we may think we're seeing may not be supported in the literature, and we need to do some more work digging into the effects. The second highest level of terpenes typically measured in cannabis comes from limonene. As the name indicates, it's a sweet lemon smell. You find it in citrus. People believe that it has an energizing effect. When we go in and look at the literature, limonene has many benefits, not the least of which are lowering stress, improving depression, lowering inflammation and oxidative stress. So there's a lot of positive things that come from this. Nowhere in the literature was I able to find where limonene in and of itself caused anxiety. Now, when we look at linalool, which is a terpene that's typically found in lavender, what we start to see is that there are some more predictable effects that come with linalool. We see that there's growing evidence to suggest that lavender essential oil, which is linalool dominant, is effective medicine in the treatment of several neurological disorders. Studies conducted on animals and humans have suggested that linalool, mood stabilizing, sedative, analgesic, and anticonvulsive, anti-inflammatory, anti-tumor, antibacterial, and neuroprotective properties. So this is a terpene that's starting to perform about like what we expect. Now, when we go take a look at what happens when these are combined, and again, we're going back to the information from our friends at Terpenated Blends and Bud Board, you'll see that people claim that limonene dominant strains tend to cause anxiety, where linalool related strains tend to cause relaxation. But when they're combined together, we actually see a dramatic increase in the relaxation experienced from that particular blend. So what we learn from this is 2 terpenes working together may actually amplify the effect that people are experiencing. Pinene is a scent that you probably recognize. If you haven't had a chance to walk through a pine forest, you certainly smell it when you walk down the cleaning aisle of a grocery store. Pine sol, pinene, these are all relatively common terpenes that have a lot of positive effects in the human body. When we look at pinene, it's an antioxidant, an anti-inflammatory terpene. So the topical application of alpha-pinene exhibited significant anti-inflammatory and analgesic effects that you get when applied to painful areas. Now, the last terpene that we're going to dive into here is caryophyllene, but also referred to as beta-caryophyllene. Beta-caryophyllene, unlike other terpenes, has a notable affinity towards the CB2 receptor. What that means is it is a full agonist. It fully activates the CB2 receptor. This makes it the only phytocannabinoid found outside of cannabis to date. The CB2 agonism may be the important feature for beta-caryophyllene against anti-inflammation. We see this supported in another paper, the CB2 receptor and its role in anti-inflammation, and we see this statement in the abstract of that paper. It suggests that the therapeutic strategies aiming at modulating CB2 signaling could be promising for the treatment of various inflammatory conditions. So what? What's this mean? Well, for the last year, I've been working with a company called O-Blend, and we make a device that can do custom terpene combinations or blends. During that time, we have established a relationship with Dr. Ethan Russo, who I mentioned earlier. And Dr. Ethan Russo has made suggested blends for particular targeted effects that you're looking for. Now, Meadow Day is a blend designed to relieve daytime pain. And what you see in Dr. Russo's blend is a high level of beta-caryophyllene targeting that CB2 receptor. You see pinene, you see the limonene, linalool combination, you see myrcene in there, and you also see nerolidol. Now, when we take a look at Dr. Russo's nighttime blend for pain, what you see is a boost in myrcene. So we see changing the terpene blends can be changing the effect depending on when we're using the particular blend. Dr. Russo also has a blend to help sleep. So what you see is a significant drop in the beta-caryophyllene, but you see those dominant myrcene, linalool, and limonene contributors. So one of the challenges that we have in the industry is consumers will go buy CBD for anxiety, they'll buy it for pain, they'll buy it to help for sleep, but we see it's not the CBD necessarily that's driving the effect, but rather the terpene blend that needs to come with it. When we take a look at Dr. Russo's anxiety blend, what you see is a lot of linalool and a lot of limonene, a little beta-caryophyllene, myrcene, and nerolidol. Now, it's important to take a look at when we compare Dr. Russo's daytime pain blend to his daytime anxiety blend. Both of these blends are recommended to come with the same level of CBD. And this is one of the challenges that we have in the industry, is that we have consumers using CBD for anxiety, for pain, to help sleep. But when we take a look at the effect of the different terpene blends, we see that there can be a notable difference in the effect that we get with a similar amount of CBD in each blend. What we're learning in this is there's a lot of health effects that can be associated with terpenes. We've only spent time going over the top 5, and what you'll see is that certain terpenes have greater effects on different issues. And our challenge comes in the fact that in our last slide from our friends at Budboard, this is the summation of 3 analyses of the same strain name being done looking at the top terpenes. And when you see is that there's a significant variation in the caryophyllene, limonene, and humulene content of the same cannabis strain. So one of our challenges is how can a patient or how can a client count on a similar effect from a particular strain if we don't understand what the terpene content is? Terpenes define the differences in cannabis and are important to its therapeutic nature. Terpenes are highly variable and explain the differences experienced with the same product. It's important that you actually know what terpenes are in your products so that you can target your conditions. That means knowing the chemovore. It's not enough to refer to strain anymore, that we have to start to take a look at the chemovore that we're dealing with so that we're able to more effectively predict the effect. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us at oblend.com, and thanks for taking the time to listen to our talk.